Mets-la comme ça. Mets-la comme ça sera raisonnable. Moi, je suis à droite. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could take your seats, please. Minister, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this COP21 side event, Shipping, Part of the Climate Solution. My name is Richard Milne. I'm the Nordic and Baltic correspondent at the Financial Times, and I'll be the moderator today. Before we start, I need to give you a little bit of practical information. We are in an art museum, so the stripy thing at the back isn't just for display, it isn't artwork, so please don't touch it. There are 2 exits in this room. Here I feel like somebody working on an airplane over there and over there. There is no fire drills planned, so in case of an alarm, please just leave calmly with the staff. The seminar lasts until about 1 p.m. There will be a short break at about 11:45, and lunch will be served after the seminar. This seminar is going to be streamed around the world, and with that, I think we're going to start with a short introductory film.
Severe, pervasive, and irreversible. Words used about the likely impact of global warming.
There's no question that we live in a world that's already altered by climate change.
Our lives go on as though it's not happening.
In some parts, temperatures are so high that even the roads are melting.
Ya no es California que era antes supuestamente. Ahorita no, ya no. Ya el trabajo ha decaído demasiado.
That the natural Earth system is absorbing CO2. A large part of that has ended up in the oceans. CO2 dissolved in seawater forms carbonic acid.
Around major emission sources over North America, Europe, and Asia.
Maybe one of the best geological analogs for the kinds of rapid changes in climate that we're going to witness now and for the next few centuries, potentially, is this end Permian time that culminated in one of the largest mass extinctions that we know of.
We cannot condemn our children to a future that is beyond their capacity to repair. Not when we have the means, the technological innovation, and the scientific imagination to begin the work of repairing it right now.
So we're at a point where decisions and investments, political decisions, commercial decisions have to be made that will take us off the path of dangerous climate change.
We have to prepare for business as unusual. Our best goal is resilience, the ability to absorb shocks and keep going.
In fact, things are getting better globally in almost every dimension. We have an explosion in innovation.
So for Paris, what we're trying to do is we're trying to marry the advance of policy with the advance of technology and the advance of finance. All of those need to actually advance together.
The other thing that gives me hope is the amazing decline of the cost of solar.
The world's #1 and #2 carbon polluters are now cooperating.
I actually think we will get an agreement in Paris, and I think that's going to be historic. Having a positive approach actually helps us deal with crises.
Combating climate change is a common challenge and a shared responsibility. The shipping industry will and must do its part. It is already today by far the most energy efficient mode of transportation. We are pursuing ambitious goals to further reduce emissions and improve energy efficiency. So in my mind, this industry is part of the climate solution.
I've just been given one more bit of practical information, just to say the headsets on your seats, they're just to translate into English, not into French. So it will be used when the Minister speaks to us later on. And with that, I'd like to welcome our first speaker up here, Gilles Darmer. He's the President of Armateurs de France.
I've got heavy pockets, so heavy pocket. So good morning, Madame la Ministre, Chiara Minister, ladies and gentlemen. It's an honor to welcome such a distinguished audience to this conference. Maybe you need the helmet. Det en ära och önskar däcka välkommen hit till Paris. As chairman of Armateurs de France, I'm very proud that France, my country, our country, your country for a few days, is hosting the COP21 and many side events for almost 2 weeks. This will take place despite of the recent terrorist attacks. It is important that it happens today to show to the world that we are still up, thanks to all countries. Thank you for all of you being here today. Shipping, green shipping, and I just realized that I was modifying my text. I have a green pen, so everything is becoming green now. Shipping is important in terms of climate change, no doubt about it. In the context of globalization, we believe that shipping is decisive and will keep on growing during the next decades. As you may know from the CNUSED report, we reached a total of 10 billion tons of cargoes moved by sea in 2014. The trend will not change. In addition, for the first time in 2014, developing countries imported more than they exported. This is the very first time, and the trend will continue. 90% of international exchanges are going through oceans, contributing to, 2% of global emission. This is a not too bad ratio, we could say, but we still need to improve as the pressure is strong. How? As a global industry, through ICS, we, ship owners, have committed to further improvement of our energy efficiency by 2050. We will have to be innovative to think outside of the box. It is what I expect from the conference today. To make a long story short, several possibilities. Number one, improving what exists. Better design, better propeller, and an easy one, speed reduction. This would have an immediate effect on emissions, immediate, no cost. Few figures to illustrate immediate efficiency. I will take example of a Capesize vessel that I know well because we do dry bulk business. A Capesize vessel 180,000 tons, burn about 65 tons a day at 14 knots, 1/4. And 40 metric tons at 10 knots. It then reduces emission by nearly 40%. It is a no-cost and immediate measure. Another possibility, scrapping old ships in excess of maybe 15 years. These ships are polluting and are very dangerous for seafarers. Keep in mind, 48% of ships are more than 10 years old, 20% of ships are more than 20 years old. Number 2, creativity. New engines fuel, such as LNG fuel. But this is chicken and eggs. Who will invest massively? Ports, or will it be owners? LNG today exists on ships, but as far as I'm aware, it's very small lines and very small distance to run. Innovations such as kite sail. Some people are laughing, but it's a way to explore. For instance, a big ro-ro ship, about 2,000 linear meters, and a ship, by the way, that we have in joint venture with a Norwegian company. 2 engines on board develops a total of 8 megawatt power. A 300 square meter kite sail develops 2 megawatt power. The kite offers then 25% of requested power for such a ship with zero emission. For your information, so my company, Louis Dreyfus Armateurs, will test live in 2016 this concept of kite sail with Airbus. Definitely, ship owners have a key role to play, but who with? I feel there is a consensus. This is IMO. IMO is the best place to regulate shipping emissions. It's our job to engage with IMO today and in the months to come. It's also our job to work with the states that are parties to the IMO to signal that we want to move ahead. Carbon tax, speed limitation, scrapping old ships. The debate is open, and the industry must be proactive, and definitely we should not let the ground to others. I won't be long, so I will give the speech to Sturla, but before finishing, I really hope that we will all work together, so COP21 in general, and for shipping more particularly, will be a success because you deserve it. So now I invite Sturla Eriksen, CEO of Norwegian Shipowners Association and co-organizer of this conference, to tell you more about this matter. Dear Sturla, welcome in France, welcome in Paris, please.
Thank you very much, Gilda. Minister, dear guests, a very good morning to you all. It's great to see prominent people from politics, business, NGOs, and other stakeholders meeting here to discuss how this industry, how the shipping industry can contribute to reduced carbon emissions. And being here in the heart of Paris, let me express my condolences and deep sympathy with our French friends and colleagues on the horrific attacks taking place only a couple of weeks ago. You are the ones suffering the losses, but these were attacks on all of us, on our values, on our freedom, and on our open democratic societies. And I think we need to join hands and stand together in combating these evil and dark forces. And the fact that people from all over the world are gathering here in Paris only shortly after these horrific events, I think is a strong manifestation of unity, a strong manifestation of the rejection of terror. And we hold high hopes and expectations for the discussions that are to take place here, and who are about sort of the existential topic of how are we to leave this our world to the next generations in a way which they deserve. We hope for a strong and committing agreement as an outcome of these negotiations. But in the same way as a war and terror cannot be left to the generals alone, I believe that our common future cannot be left to our politicians alone. This is a common challenge. It's a shared responsibility to contribute, and this industry is committed to doing its part. And even though maritime emissions are not part of the COP21 negotiations, there are multiple reasons for us attending here. One is very pragmatic, related to the fact that if we as industry are to be an active, constructive partner in discussing the regulatory framework which will determine the future of this industry, we of course have to act in a responsible and committed way. The second reason is one of commercial rationale. The transition to the low-carbon society offers exciting business opportunities. But the most important reason why we're here is, of course, the fact that there is a moral obligation, a moral responsibility for all of us to contribute in this common effort. And I believe that the shipping industry in particular and the business community in general has a lot to bring to the table. One is that the business community holds extensive and crucial experience and competence relevant to the topic at hand. Secondly, investments made by businesses today will determine the potential for carbon reductions for decades to come. A ship built today, a vessel built today, will typically be in operation for the next 3 decades. And thirdly, it will to a large extent be companies which are to develop, invent, innovate, and commercialize the technological concepts necessary for the low-carbon society. So this means also that this industry can, it must, and it will contribute to these common efforts. And indeed, as we said on the film here, we believe that this industry is indeed part of that solution. Even today, shipping is the most energy efficient mode of transportation. Carrying 90% of world trade, it accounts for 2.2% of the man-made CO2 emission. And that's only a fraction per ton mile compared to trucks and planes. And this is not a statement of complacency. Rather, it's a fact serving as an inspiration to continue and intensify the industry's efforts to reduce emissions by improving technological, operational, and the logistical concepts. And I do think that we have a track record to prove that it's possible to achieve major improvements. A container carried from Asia to Europe today generates 1/10 of the emissions compared to 30 years ago. An offshore vessel delivered today emits approximately half of the CO2 compared to a vessel built only a handful of years ago with a comparable operational capacity. And we are continuing in this industry to improve these further by improving hull designs, engines, propulsion systems, by developing cleaner fuels, and by optimizing sailing patterns and fleet capacity. Also, we are working jointly through associations like Armateurs de France, the ICS, and NSA as a constructive partner in developing the regulatory framework for this industry. And I would like to stress here, this is a truly global industry, which means that to be effective, regulations have to be global. And this is why we are so insistent that IMO is the international body for regulating maritime affairs. Let me also remind you of the huge untapped potential in obtaining a modal shift of transportation from land to sea. To give you an example, a container carried by a truck from Paris to Geneva generates the same emissions of CO2 as a container carried by ship from Rotterdam to Shanghai. So if you consider that one ship, one vessel in regional operation can substitute between 200 and 400 trucks, that gives you an indication of the potential for reduction of emissions. But it also, of course, would save and reduce the number of traffic accidents, congestions on the road, and huge costs related to road maintenance. A growing world will need more maritime services. And the reason for that is that this industry provides a worldwide web of logistics, which is a precondition for globalization and economic growth as we know it. It allows different parts and regions of the world to produce what they're best at and to exchange these goods on the world markets. And this is a precondition for what we've seen over the past decades, that hundreds of millions of people have been lifted out of poverty and into the global middle class. Also, this industry is a key component of the offshore oil and gas industry, which provides 1/3 of the oil and gas needed to fuel world economic growth. And this brings this industry to the heart of what is the dilemma and the challenge, how to combine economic growth necessary for the world to grow, prosper, and to bring further millions of people out of poverty, while at the same time reducing the emissions of carbon. And this is, I think, the topic at hand. We consider this industry to be a part of the solution. We are committed to contributing, and I look very much forward to the important discussions that we will have here today. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you, Gilda and Stella, for those excellent speeches. We now have our first panel, and I'd invite the panelists to come up and sit on the stage, please. This first panel is entitled Global Regulations and Shipping, and I'd like to take the advantage of teasing out some of the things that both of you talked about there. So, panelists, please come up. Yes, Madam Minister. I'll start with some introductions. Closest to me here is Samantha Smith. She's the leader of the Global Climate and Energy Initiative. Next to her is... Sorry, Worldwide Fund. WWF. Sorry. Okay. Apologies. Next to her is Tina Sundtoft. She's the Norwegian Minister of Climate and Environment. Then we have Edmund Hughes as the Head of Air Pollution and Energy Efficiency at the International Maritime Organization. Then we have Peter Hinchcliffe, the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Shipping. And finally, Nicholas Svenningsson, the Manager of the Sustainable Development Mechanisms Programme at the UNFCCC. So we're going to start. Each panelist can give a brief introduction, 1 or 2 minutes. And Mrs. Minister, if you could start first, please.
Ladies and gentlemen, my country has a long coastline, and domestic shipping is important for us. And the emissions from the sector contributes to the climate change problem. At the same time, our policies to create green innovation in the sector contributes to the solution and creates substantial emissions reductions. Therefore, green shipping is identified as one of 5 areas of priority in the government's white paper on climate change. We have already taken action to require that new domestic ferries use zero or low emission technology when possible. The first electric car and passenger ferry in the world was put in operation in Norway this year. More will come. We are taking actions for a green renewal of the rather old fleet of cargo vessels in domestic operation. We have several mechanisms to support investments in green technologies to cut emissions in shipping. Shipping is certainly also at a turning point. Developing green domestic shipping is important. Being a spearhead for international shipping, new and innovative green technologies and solutions will be introduced to the market. It was a major achievement at the International Maritime Organization, the UN Global Regulator for Shipping, to establish the first generation of global climate change requirements for international shipping in 2011. And the ongoing negotiations at the IMO need to conclude in 2016 on the system for greenhouse data collection of greenhouse gas emissions. We need seriously to speed up the development of the second generation of global measures for emissions reduction for shipping. And it is really encouraging that the international shipping industry is present here in Paris in these days. I really hope it is a signal for stronger industry support for firm actions on climate change at the IMO. And I really agree with Sturla Henriksen. Shipping needs to turn green, and shipping is a part of the solution. Thank you for your attention.
So if I could ask Nicholas Svenningsson to speak next, please.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here, and I think this is really a very timely meeting because shipping is one of the 2 sectors that are in Paris in a sense, but are not explicitly in the agreement simply because of their international nature. They have 2 organizations, the shipping and the aviation sectors are the two sectors, and they have each one organization, ICAO and IMO, that are taking the lead on action in this sector. So I'm working with UNFCCC, responsible for the little thing happening out in Boucher now, apologize for that. And what we're hoping to get out of this COP21 is an agreement that is going to act as a blueprint for climate work in the next several decades. It's an agreement that needs to be durable, strategic, visionary, and applicable to all. And this is important because the signal that this agreement is going to send is that we need to peak our emissions as soon as possible, and by the end of this century, we need to come down to a climate-neutral world. Because if we don't do that, we're not going to reach the 2-degree targets. What does this actually mean? Well, we have today 184 countries out of 197 parties who have submitted their naturally determined contributions. This is as good as it gets, really. 184 countries agreeing on something is really quite unique. What they're agreeing is that they are all trying to peak as soon as possible, 2020, 2030, 2050. Some of them are going down 30%, 40%, 80%. Even some countries we heard yesterday at the States of Heads meeting that are going down 100% to zero emissions within the next couple of years. International shipping at the same time has an emission today about 800 million tons of greenhouse gases. It's about 2%. It may sound small, but keep in mind that the Germans, sorry, I'm living in Germany, or our secretariat is in Germany, so Germany's total climate footprint is also about 2%. And nobody would argue that, okay, let's forget about Germany, they're so small. And the same thing for shipping. Nobody's going to forget about shipping. It is also quite clear that many are comparing shipping with aviation. And aviation is today at the brink of adopting a decision in 2016 to implement a decision that was already taken, which is to achieve carbon neutral growth from 2020 to reduce its emission by 50% by 2050. And in order to do so, because they have technological challenges, as we have in many other sectors, they're going to implement a market-based measure. So what you can't reduce in the sector, you invest in reductions elsewhere. So you offset for yourself, you reduce for the planet. Let me finally say that there's no doubt that IMO has a lead on this, but there's also no doubt that we need to see more leadership. It is not acceptable, it's not realistic to have a sector that in this business as usual projections is increasing its emissions in absolute numbers over the next couple of decades, while all the rest of the world is fighting to reduce it. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can I ask Edmund Hughes to go next, please?
Thank you very much indeed. Minister, ladies and gentlemen, it's a great honour to be here today, and I would like to thank the organisers for inviting IMO to take part in this side event off COP. It's very nice to have a side event dedicated to shipping, which many always feel is a bit of a Cinderella industry. That is, it does a very important job for this world and is not always given the recognition for it. IMO is the international regulator for shipping. We have that task. It's recognised as such. It's recognised in the Kyoto Protocol, specifically Article 2.2, identifies the IMO. Why is that? It does that because of allocation of emissions to individual states is nigh on impossible from shipping. So the task was given to IMO to look at and develop measures to reduce emissions from ships. We have done so. We have produced a mandatory framework of energy efficiency regulations which are applicable to ships. Those mandatory regulations have been in force now nearly 3 years, and we have nearly 900 ships certified to those requirements. Those are 900 ships trading now. This is a very important development, and one that, again, doesn't always get recognised. The IMO will carry on working. We have a programme of work to look at further measures, and we will look to develop those measures as soon as practicable. One of the clear signals will be from COP and the agreement, and what text is drafted in that agreement. But it's important to note, ladies and gentlemen, that and this is a big issue for policymakers, that shipping is not a pleasure industry. It's there as a servant of world trade. And though any measures that are developed will have a signal to world trade, will have a cost potentially to world trade, and it's something that many, many states consider as an important strategic part of their development, is trade. We've already heard that. And we'll see increasing amount of trade, probably interregionally in places like Asia. So it's a challenge for policymakers to decide, reduce emissions, cap emissions, decide on how you're going to make ships more energy efficient. But at the same time, there is a signal to trade and investment in shipping. And finally, I would say that the IMO, we would argue that we are the right body to look at these matters. Primarily, our convention, and we often hear about the UNFCCC convention, but not the IMO convention. The IMO convention is very clear. In Article 1 of the IMO convention, it talks about the removal of discriminatory action. That is what IMO does. We develop international regulations that apply to all ships, not states, ships. And that is a very important principle that we need to uphold. Thank you.
And if I could ask Samantha Smith of WWF.
Thank you. So I would like to just introduce even more external context into this discussion. I mean, we're living through the hottest year ever. Last year was also the hottest year ever. We can expect that next year will also be extremely hot. And what scientists tell us is not only, some scientists will tell you that it's enough to reach carbon neutrality by the end of the century. Most, however, will tell you that global emissions should be peaking right about now, and that we will need to be somewhere between 80% emissions reductions down to zero emissions around 2050. That's not very far from now. So while it's true that the IMO regulates ships and not countries, nonetheless the IMO is existing in this context of a world that is rapidly heating up. No sector will be immune from the need to cut its emissions very, very sharply indeed. We can just compare this to the energy sector, which is also essential to global economic growth, to people living decent lives, and which is going through wrenching change as a result of not changing quickly enough in response to the imperative of climate change, responding to climate change. So what we would say is that for both shipping and aviation, both of these sectors, if left unregulated, their emissions are projected to grow to be something like 40% of the global total in 2050. And that would in turn put the global goal of keeping temperature increases under 2 degrees Celsius above pre-industrial times in jeopardy, let alone the 1.5 degrees that is essential for the survival of Pacific Island states, Arctic ice ecosystems, and coral reefs, and all of the people who depend on coral reef systems for their lives and livelihoods. So we would say that it is essential that the IMO and its members, that they show the leadership now that we need, not only to cap emissions, but to put the sector on a course for very steep emissions reductions. There are many examples of industry actors who are working towards a green shipping sector, towards a shipping sector of the future. We would like to see that sector. It's not just an energy efficient sector, it's eventually a sector that gets by without fossil fuels. But certainly a first step would be a strong levy on bunker fuels. We actually believe, we've done some of the modeling, we've talked to developing country governments, we believe it's possible to do this in a way that's consistent with the principle of common but differentiated responsibilities under the UNFCCC. We think that's actually essential. I'll just conclude by saying that climate change is the mother of all signals to global trade and economic growth, and in fact to people being able to live decent lives. And all of us, including the shipping sector, are going to have to respond to that signal. Thank you.
And Peter Hinchcliffe, please.
Thank you, Richard. Well, picking up where the previous speaker started, I'd like to wish the Minister and everybody here a very warm good morning. The very first line of the position which the International Chamber of Shipping has taken for the COP21 meeting is that we hope for and wish for a global agreement. And as previous speakers have said, we believe that shipping is part of that solution, but our wish out of this meeting in Paris is to have that global agreement. But when you turn to shipping, we have an industry which is very sadly maligned, and without being in the least bit patronizing, I think if you talk to the average man or woman in the street, if they even think about shipping at all, they will speak about an image which is old-fashioned, polluting, irrelevant, and in fact nothing could be further from the truth. If you go on board a modern ship today, you will find a bridge and an engine room that feature the very latest state-of-the-art technology. This is an industry which is subject to regulation that governs virtually every impact of the ship on the environment. And a previous speaker has spoken about leadership. The IMO has certainly shown that leadership by proving not only can it develop and adopt global regulation, but it can be applied globally as well. And I think the proof of that is very evident. Turning to CO2, shipping is the first industry to have a regulation of its emissions that in fact becomes more strict over time and applies to all new ships all over the globe. Existing ships are required to operate under an efficiency management plan. That is to get the maximum gain from every litre of fuel. If you think about it, that is in the very interest of the ship owner and the ship operator. So the trajectory which the IMO has helped us to set and which the shipping industry fully supports is one for ever increasing in-sector efficiency for every tonne of cargo carried. There is a graph which I'll just briefly hold up. I'm not sure I get it the right way up, otherwise the message will be wrong. I have got a few copies of this, but more importantly, there is a press release going out more or less now, which has got that graph in it, and I hope you'll have a look at it to indicate the trajectory that we're on. So I'm hoping that all of you, will leave today's event with a new image of a progressive, efficient industry, without which the achievement and maintenance of a modern lifestyle could not be done across the world, bringing benefits equally to developing and least developed countries. This can only be done through the IMO, as I've already said, and that is our call to the Climate Change Conference. Give this task to the IMO because the IMO will deliver. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for everybody, also for keeping it brief, allowing for some questions. I will throw it open later for questions from the floor. I thought I'd start by asking one of the issues that many people have touched upon. We're expecting a huge increase in the world population, 2 billion in the next 20 or 30 years. There's a lot of talk about how do we reconcile this population growth, the economic growth that comes with that, and reduce emissions at the same time. I'd like to ask each panelist to begin with that question, and specifically, you know, how the shipping industry can play into that. And Samantha, if I could start with you.
So about 5 years ago, WWF launched a report, the Energy Report, which showed that the world could achieve 100% renewable energy for all of its energy needs by 2050. People thought we were fools. I even had my questions about whether this was possible. But we see now that this is possible, and it's becoming more achievable more quickly because of innovation and commercialization of existing technologies. So I think the first thing to say is that it is possible to have a zero carbon, zero poverty world. The issue is not really population growth, actually, it's consumption. And it's primarily, at this point, consumption in richer countries, and to a much lesser extent, consumption amongst wealthier people in some developing countries. But it's really not an issue of having a lot of people. It's an issue of some people using more than their fair share of the world's resources. So the first thing is that energy is responsible for most of the world's emissions. And it's possible to have an energy system that has zero, very close to zero emissions, also for shipping. And I also want to add that the role of shipping is quite important. As a number of people have said, it's preferable in a lot of ways to land-based transport, especially when it comes to global trade. There are many examples of the shipping industry now responding on emissions, both in terms of ship classes, new green ship technologies, and so on, the slow steaming development, which has had a good effect on emissions. But what we're really talking about for this world with 9 billion people, where we hope that all of them are living decent lives, we're going to have to talk about transformation of this sector as with other sectors. And transformation does not just mean more efficiency in the use of fuels, it means very different designs for the way that we power ships and maybe even how we manufacture products, things like digitalization. So I don't want to look too far into the future, but I just want to stress the point that there's a pathway which is about progressive incremental change, and then at some point you're going to have a step change in technology. I know many companies are already working on those technologies. We see it also happening in the automotive sector. So I would encourage also in the IMO, in whatever policy designs it may have, to consider this issue of what it takes to stimulate transformational technologies as opposed to incremental improvements. Because we have a global carbon budget, which applies to everybody. And whether shipping is regulated under the IMO or the UNFCCC, its emissions will still have to fit within this global carbon budget.
And if I could turn to the Minister, Norway is a leading oil producer. It's obviously a big maritime nation. You've been very proactive in some global green initiatives. How do you manage this balance between growth and reducing emissions? How does Norway as an oil producer help lower emissions?
We are one of the nations with rich oil and gas resources, and that has given Norway a responsibility and an opportunity to cut emissions. And we have taken ambitious steps to reduce greenhouse gas emissions from the offshore oil and gas activity. And we have and we will continue to invest in carbon capture and storage. And we are using our economic resources created by the oil and gas sector to invest in low emission solutions in all sectors. And as I mentioned, we have 5 areas in our white paper for our 2030 goals. When we are talking, have made a decision to reduce our emissions from 40% from 1990 to 2030. We are talking about low industry, a low emission industry, carbon capture and storage, renewable energy, transport, and the 5th, green shipping. So we are using our rich from the oil and gas to do this transformation, and that's why we think we can do something in green shipping, both to reduce emissions in Norway and to reduce emissions global. So we have started the transformation to the low emission society. But I know that someone wants us to speed it up, what we have started.
Talking of speeding up and moving on to Edmund, a couple of speakers mentioned leadership, the IMO. People would say the IMO has a decent track record, but do you think there's a need for more leadership, for more to be done, and how do you balance these competing factors?
Yeah, I think I've heard there's several points which I mean, in terms of the leadership question, as I said in my opening remarks, IMO has a role. That role has been given to it by the international community already. It's been there. The organisation was established in 1948. So, before even greenhouse gases were talked about, that role is, as I said before, to ensure there's a removal of discriminatory action to support trade. If the global population, you go back to your first question, is going to grow, obviously we have to address the concerns of that global community. And one of those concerns is climate change. There's no doubt about it. That's what we're here these next 2 weeks for. How we do that, as I said, alluded to already, we've put in place energy efficiency measures. those measures will lead to, ships built in 2025, so we're only 10 years away from now, they will be 30% more energy efficient than ships built last year. So there is real progress being made. That will require, for some shipping sectors, new technologies to be adopted, new materials to be adopted. People are looking at smarter ships, data communications to enable weather routing, to enable the ships to be properly and more effectively managed from the shore. All these things will come into play. It just takes time, because ships, when you build and invest in a ship, you don't do it for 1 or 2 years. You tend to do it for 10, 15, maybe even 20 years. So these investment decisions that the ship owners are having to make now are having to think forward. But they will bring results, and the IMO will create a regulatory framework will enable the shipping industry globally to respond effectively.
And Peter, your organisation represents a lot of countries. I mean, how do you see you balance all sorts of different views in there? I mean, how do you, when you're looking at this equation, growth or consumption against reducing emissions, what can and what should the industry be doing?
Well, I believe that every child in this world has the right to aspire to a modern lifestyle. And the only way to stimulate that is to stimulate global growth and trade. But as already been said, shipping is the servant of that trade. It is not the determinant of it. And so we shouldn't get ourselves into a position where shipping controls world trade. What shipping must do, and what it does do, is to accept and acknowledge that it has a responsibility to make sure that the trade is delivered in the most efficient manner possible per ton mile. And I think as we think about the somewhat daunting growth in world population that we're going to see over the next few years, it is obvious that it's only by servicing those needs through maximum efficiency that we're actually going to be able to do that in a way that will also meet the aspirations of the global agreements at COP21. As I've already said, I believe we're on that trajectory. I think we can do more. We're already seeing tremendous innovation in short sea shipping. It's very difficult in the very short term to imagine that international trade across oceans can move away from fossil fuel very quickly, but I don't think the industry is frightened of that prospect. I think that the experimentation that's going on in short sea shipping will give us progress in innovation, and I'm sure that we'll see that starting to be adopted in global shipping over the coming decades.
Yeah, and Nicholas, if I can ask you, I mean, particularly we've been hearing aviation and shipping aren't part of the COP21 deal. What is the sort of what needs to happen to ensure that something tougher, something more invasive happens to the industry?
Okay. So yes, I mean, I would say that shipping aviation is not part, but it's also not part of the Paris Agreement, because you don't have cement industry, for example, or tourism, or train, or auto manufacture, or telecommunications, or any other sector explicitly mentioned in the Paris Agreement. The nature of the Paris Agreement is that it is an agreement between parties, by nation states. And the nature of aviation shipping is that they are very international in nature, and that is why IMO and ICAO have the responsibilities for bringing that agenda forward. I believe very much that, I mean, what's said here earlier, that it is a matter of efficiency improvements, of new technologies, thinking a little bit outside the box. I think these sectors has a choice between doing it step by step or having to do it very steeply a little bit later. And it's clear that it's easier to do it step by step. But you need a signal for doing this. And some of the speakers here earlier said that, well, some kind of carbon pricing. What is the price of carbon in the shipping sector today? I actually don't know what the price is. I know that there will be a price for aviation sector. I know that there will be a price for all nationally regulated sectors. So this kind of policy making that is actually really supporting the industry to move forward is what we need from IMO. And I think that IMO, like ICAO, is first and foremost driven by the private sector. The politicians, the policymakers here are listening very much to the private sector. So we want to see this move forward by the people who know the best how this can be done. We need to see action by the shipping industry. The risk otherwise is that you will have policymakers who really don't understand the shipping industry, who will put policies top down on the sector, which is probably not so good.
And if I can turn back to the Minister, who has to unfortunately leave us in a couple of minutes. So if I just ask you a couple of extra questions. This discussion on regulation, do you think the industry can act without government regulations, or what's the role for governments in all of this?
I really think the history has proven that governmental regulations are needed to develop societies in the direction national and international democracy decides. And that's why it's so important when we are leaving Paris in maybe a couple of weeks or earlier, that we have an agreement with a framework that we really understand which direction we are working. And we need both mechanisms to speed up the transformation and regulation, and that's why I talking about how we used money from oil and gas in Norway to put money into development. The first car and car and passenger ferry, they got a lot of money from a lot of official money to develop the first ferry. And when you get first get the first ferry, you can to produce the second one. It's not that expensive. So we just need the direction and some regulations and use some public money.
And then Norway is quite active in this, as you mentioned. I mean, you have put domestic shipping as one of your priorities for COP21. But how do you think that affects international shipping? Because Norway, well, a maritime power, is still sort of relatively small. How is it a sort of beacon effect that you can have, or?
We have not put the green shipping for the COP21, but for our intended nationally determined goals, that we really believe in. We can do some more in green shipping in Norway, and our shipping environment can do more in Norway and introduce that technology for the rest of the world. And that's the way we have to work together, public and private, and that every country have to do more, and we have to learn from each other, because the climate challenge is global. That's why it's so important that we do more together.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Minister. I think you have to leave us now, so but thank you very much for your time here. I'd like to, we've still got quite a few minutes left, so I thought I might ask if there's anybody from the floor who would like to ask a question. There's a lady over there. Just wait to get a microphone for you. Yes, for the lady over there, please. If you could just introduce yourself, please.
Alice Bowes-Larkin from the Tyndall Centre for Climate Change Research in the University of Manchester. As we've heard, the shipping industry is a global industry. It serves both developed and developing countries. But the 2-degree target has led to INDCs from both developed countries and developing, with developed setting a peak in emissions perhaps very soon, in the next decade or so, developing nations somewhat later. But we also know that there's analysis that shows that 2 degrees, for a good chance of 2 degrees, requires decarbonisation probably closer to 2050, has already been mentioned. So I was just wondering, when could we feasibly see a peak in shipping CO2 emissions, and what are the next likely mechanisms that might bring this about?
Peter Edmund.
Well, it's already been mentioned, the third IMO greenhouse gas study, which was published last year, forecast that there will be an increase in emissions up to 2050 between 50% and 250%. These are based on the scenarios that were used by the IPCC, and they reflect economic growth, and with that will come trade. So going back to the point we've already stressed before, in terms of capping emissions, a lot will depend on the technologies. We've already mentioned that new ships will be more energy efficient, and that will be part of the equation. I think it's difficult to say. I mean, we heard earlier about phasing out hydrocarbons, use of hydrocarbons on ships. I mean, at the moment, ships are essentially mobile power stations. Some of them have 50 megawatt, 60 megawatt engines. You can't readily change that. You can maybe be able to phase out on the land some of the use of hydrocarbons and replace it with alternative fuels or alternative technologies. But on a ship at sea, we're talking about in the middle of the deep oceans here, it's hard to see that in the next 20, 30 years. We can use alternative fuels. We can use maybe biofuels. Those are some of the measures that could be taken. But at the moment, it's still, as Peter said, we will be using hydrocarbons probably for the foreseeable future. The other point I should make as well is about slow steaming. That is a possibility. Yes, it is a possibility. It was alluded to in the keynote. However, of course, with slow steaming, the implication of that means you need more ships to carry the same amount of cargo. You either need more ships or you need bigger ships. We've already got some of the biggest man-made machines in the world. Well, they are the biggest man-made machines. They're called ships. So trying to see the growth of the market there, again, there will be limitations, not least in ports, which can take those ships. So there are numerous challenges here, and I don't want to underplay them, but it's something that is going to be difficult to achieve in the near term.
Peter, can I ask, everybody, the world is expected to have an absolute reduction in emissions. Is it realistic to think that the shipping industry can avoid having an absolute reduction?
Well, let me just counter a little bit what Edmund has said and come back to the original question. The first point is that the greenhouse gas study has some top-end estimates for world trade, which we don't believe. They're, if you like, based on a business-as-usual model for world trade, and we don't think that is the way that world trade is going to move forward into the future. I think that we're seeing already the growth of service-based trade in developing countries. Supply routes are probably shortening, so therefore demand for maritime growth in capacity is not likely to be at the top end of those estimates. If we take the middle end of the estimates, then, or the middle section of the estimates, then we're confident that we're going to deliver carbon neutral growth out to 2050, and that's what the graph that I waved in front of you before is designed to show, and I hope you'll have a look at that. And I think between now and 2050, as I've already indicated, we're going to see a huge focus of innovation on international shipping. It's a really difficult problem to move massive amounts of cargo across oceans over long distances and think that in the short term we can move away from fossil fuel. But I'm sure that's going to come in the future. We're going to see more efficiency. We're going to see probably different fuels that we're not even thinking about today. And I'm very confident that before we get to 2050, we'll see that innovation coming into play.
Samantha and Nicholas, do you have anything to add?
Sure. I mean, as we talked about earlier, a first step of getting towards an emissions peak would actually be a proper levy on bunker fuels. It would be much, much stronger emission standards than what we have today. And in other sectors, what we see is that these things work, right? They're working in, for example, the automobile industry to bring down emissions, but also to stimulate the development of new modes of transport and also use of new technologies in personal mobility, so hydrogen, EVs, whatever. And with all respect for the challenges of the shipping sector, there are also enormous challenges in other sectors, such as the energy sector, where you're seeing, as I said, this very disruptive transition from coal in many places to solar and wind and radical energy efficiency. I think as I think as well, one other thing that most of us are just vaguely aware of, but we can't really model the impacts of it, will be digitalization and sort of localized production. And that in turn is going to have a massive impact on the shipping sector, one we can't really oversee at the moment. We think it's likely that we're going to get an agreement here in Paris. We think that that agreement, what we see from the INDCs and so forth, the total of what we have on the table is only about half of the effort we need to stay under this 2-degree upper limit. And so what that means is that everyone is going to have to do more, and that's going to include the shipping sector, and that some of the things that are unthinkable right now in terms of carbon pricing, levies on fuels and whatever, will become very thinkable in a short time as we start to see these accelerating impacts of climate change. I think we also have a tendency in sectors to see this kind of disruptive change as bad. But I want to say that, for example, if Norway and other shipping nations adopt industrial policies which really promote the development, R&D, commercialization, deployment, testing, pilot projects, international collaboration. If you have national industrial policy which is really promoting zero carbon, low emission shipping, that also can produce an explosion of jobs and economic growth in a way that's good for the environment. So we mustn't, I hope, fall into the trap of seeing change as only bad and destroying jobs. Change can also bring new jobs, new growth, new industrial sectors, for example, to a country like Norway. Thank you.
And Nicholas, any brief thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think that Samantha said most of what I wanted to say here. But I mean, very briefly, I'm sitting also in meeting with quite a few other sectors. And I must say that they are no different from the shipping sector. They also say, but we are really important for world trade. We are really important for economic development. Fine, everybody else reduce. We have to continue to grow. Frankly speaking, we can't. Because we're living on one planet, there's no planet B, there's no plan B. We have to reduce emissions, and we have to be part of the solution. The title of this seminar is Shipping as Part of the Climate Solutions. And I think everybody recognizes that certainly there are technological barriers, but technological barriers can be overcome. And until those barriers can be overcome in the shipping sector, how can the shipping sector be a solution for the global climate problem? Because the climate problem is a global one. The aviation sector has come up with the idea that what they can't reduce in their own sector, they're going to come to compensate by helping other sectors who can reduce their emissions. And yes, there's a price tag to that. And that is something that is accepted, because carbon is not free. Its pollution is not free. And the sooner that we get to grips and accept that and start to integrate the cost of carbon into our decision making, the better it is. Because I think it was Minister who said that the investment decisions we're doing in the next couple of years are going to be fundamental for the long term, or maybe it was Sturla who said that, I can't recall, sorry. But really, we have investment decisions that need to be taken in the next 5, 10, maximum 15 years, but really over the next couple of years, that are going to decide the quality of life for future generations. We have to stand up to this. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got quite a lot of questions, but there's a man at the back. If you could just introduce yourself.
Ralph Nagel, German Ship Owners Association. I want to ask for a little clearance. Who is addressing what to whom? And it will end to a question to Nicholas. There's a lot of finger pointing to IMO. What is IMO? IMO is not an industry body. It's states, 129 when I'm right. And all of them are part of COP21. Insofar, my question is, do we need, or doesn't we need, a clear message and decision from COP21? What's the size of the greenhouse gas cake you're talking about, Samantha? And so far, there's a question to Nicholas. What will be the definition by the states from COP21? What is the size of the cake? And what is the expectation to the different sectors they should deliver to prevent that the cake will be too big and we have the problems which are mentioned? And so far, first of all, it's questions to the states together, which are together here, and have a decision, because as long as we don't have a roof for, let's say, a definition of the cake, we will have a problem in IMO, because then we will have the discussions, how should the Chinese delegate in the IMO could be proactive when he don't have a clear commitment of his government for the general reduction of greenhouse gas. And so far I think this is a little bit finger-pointing IMO, is also have 3 fingers to the member states which are here to discuss and decide about. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. So, yes, you're absolutely right that IMO is also a membership or countries organization, United Nations organization. The decision from Paris that will come here is going to be very, very clear. And we already said it. Peak as soon as possible, reach climate neutrality at the end of the century. Earlier, preferably. In terms of IMO and aviation, because there are actually total parallels between aviation and IMO, you both have these non-discriminatory principles in the conventions. And it is not because the sector itself is not a sector, although it's regulated by states, the actors in the sector are individual companies, individual organizations. So aviation has taken a decision that the requirements are the same for all airlines. Doesn't matter from where they are. And this is still a political discussion, certainly, and this will certainly still be a discussion at the ICAO Assembly next year. But the understanding is that there's no discrimination, everybody have to do their piece of the pie.
We've got quite a lot of hands up in the air, so I don't know whether maybe you can go first, but let's keep the questions short, and we'll try and keep the answers short as well to get through.
Thank you. Colin Laughlin, BC Shipping News in Canada. 3 questions for anybody on the panel.
I think we have to...
One?
Just one,
well,
please.
Okay, they're coming. What's the state of the art on low sulfur fuels right now? And if there is a global levy on bunker fuels, how is it administered? And who do you pay it to?
If I can interrupt, actually, I think that could be a good one for the second panel, if you don't mind, because that's going to. This panel is more on regulation, and the.
Do I get another one then?
No, but we can. If you hold that thought, hold that question.
Hold that one, and I'll substitute this one.
There's actually 2 other questions, okay. So if I could ask you to ask the question in the next panel, that would be perfect, sir. Thank you.
Good morning. John Maggs from Seas at Risk in Brussels and the Clean Shipping Coalition. Of course, there is a slightly awkward dynamic between the UNFCCC process and the IMO. And there's also, I think, some rather confusing messaging going on here. We've touched on the crux of the issue, which is that there is a finite carbon budget, and the shipping industry only gets part of that. And that it therefore has to reduce its emissions in an absolute sense, and in the end decarbonise. The problem that we've got, of course, is that that the International Maritime Organization Secretary General recently said that measures that would result in any cap on the absolute emissions from the sector should be avoided. This is the Secretary General of the IMO. And the International Chamber of Shipping's policy is also that, as we have sort of gathered here, is also clear that absolute emissions reductions are off the table, if you like, for the foreseeable future. So what's happening here is that the attitude, certainly I'll get there, but the attitude at the IMO is on a little bit of a collision course for UNFCCC objectives around 2 degrees. And this is why, and this is the point I would like the panel's view on, we need some political direction. And the reason that we need something out of Paris is because the IMO, left to its own devices, doesn't appear at the moment to be capable of making the hard decisions that would result in absolute emission reductions. So my question, I suppose, is to the IMO and ICS principally, is how do you square this problem without a commitment to IMO to absolute emission reductions? How is the shipping industry ever going to play its part in reaching 2 degrees, let alone the 1.5, actually, which over 100 states are now demanding as the target for climate change? Thank you.
Very brief answers, if I could.
John, thank you for the question. Governments have to decide what it is they want. Do they want shipping to reduce its carbon inventory, or do they want shipping to deliver funding for other industries to do the actions for them? Our focus is completely on reducing emissions from shipping itself, and I think, John, you and I would reach agreement on that. If we get to the point where that is no longer possible, or governments decide they want to do it in another way, then we're not afraid of that debate. We've already made our position very clear as long ago as Copenhagen, that if governments want to have a market-based measure for shipping, then that should be a levy, because we believe that is the only deliverable market-based measure that will not distort the shipping market. We believe that can be delivered, but we are waiting for governments to indicate that that is what they want, and at the moment our focus is just on efficiency.
Just to answer that question in particular, I think one of the problems is how much political capital member governments want to expend in terms of discussing international shipping and aviation in this COP, when there's quite frankly quite a lot of many other issues they need to resolve before we have an agreement. And the concern of the IMO Secretariat, I'm speaking on behalf of the Secretariat, I'm not speaking on the member states, is that we end up with a text that frankly is ill-crafted and leads to some problems when it comes to implementation when we go back to IMO. So, I mean, that's just a practical issue in terms of what we get at the end of the day here. I think, as I said before, IMO is the right body to deliberate these matters, and you know, we hope that there will be a clear signal to suggest that IMO should carry on its work and lead to measures that can be implemented, because that again is an issue that often is not thought about. How do we implement these measures in a practical way? I must discuss the issue about the levy, because the levy is being talked about, and it was actually within the agreement in the draft text at one point. But there are several proposals on the table at IMO, and indeed Norway, along with I think Germany, France, and the UK, have proposed that we have an emissions, an ETS, an emissions trading system for international shipping. So, whilst there are advocates for the levy scheme, there are other proposals that have been put on the table, along with other ones related to energy efficiency of ships, and also even a port state levy one of the member states has put on the table. So we cannot ignore those, and the IMO organisation can't just put those to one side, because they need proper due deliberation. Once again, they need to be done at IMO.
Samantha, just before, we had one last question here from Frederick, and then we'll wrap it up if we could. If you could make it extremely brief.
Thank you for this initiative, Frederick Hauge from Bologna Foundation. I would like to ask, are you not a little bit defensive when it comes to the operational room you have within shipping? First of all, it's not only IMO, it's also other bodies that is regulating shipping. EU will regulate the short sea shipping and national waterways. If you should look what is outside the emission trading sector, probably 30,000–40,000 boats have to be retrofitted the next 15 years. Biofuel, I think biofuel has a huge potential, not with soya. If you should take the shipping on soya, you should grow all Europe from Paris to Oslo with soya, but algae and things like that. So my question is a little bit, why do you, in your speeches, you're very defensive on what kind of technological operational room you have. It's now built one ferry on battery. I'm working now with a cargo ship going on batteries. I've been sailing on Greenland on a hybrid electric rechargeable sailing boat on batteries. There is a huge space for you out there. And for me, it seems that you're not looking into the technological option room you have in creating this. And this is necessary to see what kind of regulations will come in the Great Lakes in US, EU, Long Beach and so on. Is IMO on the track here?
Maybe I should just let them answer first, and then.
Well, I'll reiterate what I said earlier. We have international regulations in place. They are requiring ships to be, compared to last year, 30% more energy efficient in 2025. So that will drive innovation. That will drive thinking. It already is. The yards, the designers of ships are thinking already how they're going to meet some of these targets, because whilst, and it's being phased in, as Peter said, you know, we are now in phase 1, we've got phase 2, phase 3 to come, and certainly phase 3 is a challenge for some of the sectors. So we will look at innovation, there will be innovation, but it takes time. As I said, the investment decisions being made today will affect ships that are going to be built in the next few years. Those ships will be around in 2030. So it's not a short term, and unlike other industries, you know, you make these decisions. We're asking people to make those capital investments, you know, now, and it's a big decision for them to make. And I think you know, you say we're defensive. We're only defensive because we know that the measures or the changes that need to be taken aren't necessarily very clear at the moment. There's a lot of uncertainty about what can be done in future to these ships. All the examples you gave, sir, were short sea shipping examples. You know, a bulk carrier trading in the North Atlantic in the middle of winter has some different challenges to any other, I would say, type of vehicle, and it's trying to get and meet those challenges, which is a technical issue. But I still I haven't seen anything that can come up to the power density of a marine diesel engine. And until I see that, that's why perhaps as an engineer, I'm slightly defensive.
Well, this is exactly what we'll come back to in the second panel after a break. Samantha, if it, very briefly, a last word.
So two thoughts. I mean, a couple of the questions have been really about the politics, right? That you have the same government sitting in the IMO and the UNFCCC, and if they're so inclined, they can send a very powerful signal also into this sector about an emissions cap and about the kinds of measures that will bring down shipping emissions. And that's correct. Now, they might not do it here in Paris, but let's not pretend it will be done when we walk out the door here in Paris. This is, there's going to be a set of negotiations. There's likely to be an agreement. There will be further agreements and modifications to what we get here in Paris, because we already know that's going to be necessary. So we mustn't act as if whatever is here is going to be definitive for the future of any sector, including shipping. There will be more. The second thing is that, and the more will probably include one of the things that you, sir, were asking for, which is this signal about how you work out the relationship between national shipping emissions and the fact that shipping is a global industry, and this issue of common but differentiated responsibilities. The second point is about being on the front foot as a sector. So, again, if we look at the coal sector right now, you can see an example of an industry, and the energy sector in general, a sector that was not on the front foot. They resisted change as much as they could. Change has come to them. It's painful. People are losing their jobs. You're having a massive, unwilled restructuring. So I attended an event where Kofi Annan spoke, and he closed with a comment to leaders about climate change. This would also apply to the IMO and to ship owners associations. He said that where leaders do not lead, the people will take the lead and they will make the leaders follow. So let us also think about that. It's important to take the lead at the right time.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank all our panelists. It's been an excellent discussion. We're now going to have a 10-minute break to refresh ourselves, have some coffee. But thank you very much to our panel today. Okay, perfect. So should we... Okay. If people could start to take their seats, please. Thank you. You get the impression nobody listens. Could everybody please take their seats? Thank you.
Do we have like 5 minutes apiece or
a bit smaller if you could. We said 1 to 2 minutes, but if you stretch till 3. It'll be a bit like the first session, so I'll probably ask a general question to everybody, and then we'll probably open it up to the floor. But we're
I think the jury's still out on that one.
Okay. So we're just waiting for the minister. He's on his way. I think he's in the building. Not like Elvis. Yeah, for anybody who doesn't speak French, the minister, I think, is going to speak in French, so this would be the opportunity to use the headsets. So I'd like to welcome now the French Minister of Maritime Transport, Mr. Alain Videlis.
Madame la ministre, mais je crois qu'elle est partie d'après ce que l'on m'a dit. Monsieur le secrétaire général, monsieur le président, mesdames et messieurs, je suis très honoré de pouvoir conclure par ces quelques mots la séquence dédiée au transport maritime. Je salue tous ceux qui ont qui se sont activement engagés pour que soit inscrit cet événement dans la COP 21. La volonté de continuer à travailler ensemble dans un esprit constructif, ouvert et respectueux est sans doute la meilleure réponse que nous puissions apporter aux événements tragiques qui ont récemment touché la France. Et nous devons continuer en ayant simplement à l'esprit de répondre que vivre et travailler, c'est probablement la meilleure réponse que l'on doit faire aux terroristes. Le commerce mondial, d'ailleurs, rapproche les femmes et les hommes, parce que échanger des biens ou des services nous oblige à nous mettre à la place de l'autre, à comprendre ses besoins, à lui proposer des solutions bénéfiques et durables dans l'intérêt général. Le transport maritime est le vecteur essentiel des échanges mondiaux. 90% des biens mondiaux sont transportés par la voie d'eau. Rappelons que ce mode de transport massifié est l'un des moins émetteurs à la tonne kilomètre transporté. Ces performances lui confèrent également des responsabilités. Le transport maritime est une partie de la solution recherchée, sachant que la croissance du commerce mondial entraîne celle du transport et potentiellement celle des émissions contre lesquelles il nous faut lutter. La France, pays d'hôte de la 21e conférence des parties de la Convention cadre des Nations Unies sur les changements climatiques, a en ce sens un devoir d'exemplarité et entend porter ainsi une croissance bleue faite d'emplois, d'activités et respectant l'environnement. L'économie maritime représente déjà, pour un pays comme la France, 310 000 emplois directs et un chiffre d'affaires de 69 milliards d'euros. Les acteurs du transport maritime sont conscients des enjeux et ont d'ailleurs pris déjà des engagements. Plusieurs initiatives illustrent leur volonté de participer à cet effort global. Engagement de l'ICS pour une réduction de 20% des émissions à la tonne transportées d'ici 2020. Engagement volontaire des compagnies maritimes, des grandes compagnies maritimes. Initiative en faveur de l'environnement, comme le Clean Shipping Index ou le World Port Climate Initiative. La diminution de la vitesse des navires, largement répandue au niveau mondial, a d'ores et déjà permis une réduction notable des émissions. La France accompagne à son niveau ces évolutions, notamment via des mécanismes de financement innovants, comme pour le navire du futur. Ces éléments impliquent toutefois une dimension internationale qui est nécessaire, portée par l'Organisation maritime internationale, dont je salue ici le représentant. Plusieurs travaux ont été engagés à ce titre. Je pense à l'index d'efficacité énergétique ou au plan de gestion de l'efficacité énergétique des navires. Je salue également les initiatives en cours pour mettre en place un système global de rapportage, de surveillance et de vérification des émissions, dit MRV, pour Monitoring, Reporting and Verification. Je soutiens l'esprit constructif qui a animé les derniers travaux techniques et souhaite qu'il fédère les volontés pour que soit mise en œuvre une règle internationale de suivi des émissions de CO2. Elle sera le socle des mesures à prendre pour réduire l'empreinte carbone des transports maritimes. Nous savons aussi que ces efforts ne doivent pas être déçus par le jeu de la concurrence déloyale, qui contournerait les règles adoptées en quittant un pavillon pour un autre. Il est donc essentiel d'agir ensemble et de manière non discriminatoire, et que les efforts continuent d'être faits dans ce sens pour que les mesures prises soient efficaces et appliquées par tous. Si la responsabilité du transport maritime dans les émissions globales est modeste, 2,6%, assurons-nous qu'elle le reste. Madame la secrétaire exécutive, on peut souhaiter que le secteur puisse s'engager comme l'ont fait les États qui ont officiellement transmis leurs engagements nationaux de réduction des gaz à effet de serre. À leur exemple, fixons ensemble des objectifs qui contribueront à lutter contre les changements climatiques en contenant le phénomène mondial du réchauffement. Nous devons reconnaître le changement climatique comme un défi pour les entreprises de transport maritime et agir maintenant pour que ce secteur contribue pleinement à notre obligation commune de répondre à l'objectif global de réduction des émissions. Il ne serait pas compris que le secteur maritime n'apporte pas sa contribution aux stratégies globales de réduction. Cela serait en contradiction avec l'image de transport faiblement impactant dont les acteurs du shipping sont légitimement fiers et qu'ils entendent défendre. Or, tout retard dans la mise en œuvre de mesures de réduction se paiera demain au prix fort. Il est donc crucial de définir sans attendre des cibles progressives et des délais raisonnables pour permettre à l'industrie de les atteindre. Ces efforts méritent que nous les accompagnions en mobilisant les financements appropriés à tous les niveaux, fiscaux, financiers et bancaires. N'oublions pas également que ces efforts n'aboutiront que s'ils ont été conduits avec les acteurs portuaires qui s'engagent aussi pour la lutte contre le changement climatique et la préservation de l'environnement. L'emploi du GNL comme carburant et l'alimentation électrique des navires et des bateaux à quai sont à la fois des solutions environnementales globales et des voies d'excellence vers la transition énergétique. Rappelons enfin qu'il ne nous suffira pas de mobiliser des capitaux. Il nous faudra compter sur nos forces vives, l'expertise, le savoir-faire, l'expérience des femmes et des hommes qui mèneront ce combat. Cela passe par les écoles et la formation aux métiers maritimes. L'apprentissage des nouvelles technologies, des carburants alternatifs, GNL, électricité, méthanol, la conception des navires du futur rendront leur emploi toujours plus sûr, plus efficace. La transition énergétique est faite d'innovation dont les vertus n'appartiennent qu'aux sociétés du savoir et de l'intelligence. La formation des marins est aussi à l'évidence un paramètre déterminant pour l'engagement des générations futures dans la transition écologique. Je vous remercie tous pour la qualité de vos travaux et souhaite que l'on puisse poursuivre dans cette dynamique pour répondre ensemble à ces défis qui convoquent nos forces, nos intelligences et nos talents. Je vous remercie.
Merci bien, Monsieur le Ministre. So if I could ask the four panelists for the second panel, please, to come up. So I introduced the panelists. Closest to me, we have Hervé Lapierre. He's the head of new building at Louis Dreyfus Armateurs. Next to him is Paul Simons, the deputy executive director of the International Energy Agency. Then it's Diane Gilpin, the CEO of the Smart Green Shipping Alliance. And finally, Jose Maria Figueres, the former president of Costa Rica and the co-chair of the Global Ocean Commission. Mr. Figueres, if I could start with you, if we can have some opening statements, as in the previous panel, if you could keep them brief, 1 to 2 minutes, that would be perfect. Thank you.
1 or 2 minutes, okay. Richard, if I may, I'd like to just zoom out during those 2 minutes. 3 very rapid recognitions, 3 realities, 3 challenges, and 3 parts to the solution. The recognitions. To all of you, amigas y amigos in the shipping industry, between the Carbon War Room and yourselves, we have been working on shipping efficiency for many years now. There's a lot of progress that we have made. We can still continue to make progress, but the voyage has been tremendous, no pun intended on the voyage. Secondly, a recognition to France. What an extraordinary nation that, in spite of the very challenging most recent circumstances, we're all here together as a world. And third, a recognition to Norway and to Scandinavia. I come from a small country on the other side of the world that when it grows up wants to be like Scandinavia. So to begin with, this year, 2015, 98% of our energy has been only renewable. Now 3 realities. Amigas y amigos, we convene in Paris in a moment of global political tension, global economic weakness, and global environmental urgency. The tension we have read about, the economic weakness we know, and the environmental urgency is the imperative. And in spite of that very delicate circumstance, we have 3 challenges. Sturla mentioned 2 of them very eloquently this morning. Combating poverty and equity, because we have the economic wherewithal to do that today. Getting rid of climate change, for which we have some of the technology, but not all. And I would say facing the end of 200 years of the era of industrialization, because the steam engine is out and something much better is in. So finally, Richard, to your 2.5 minutes, the 3 parts of the solution: technology, policy, and financing. Gildas and Sturla talked this morning about the technologies, and we have some of them for the shipping, we need others. We have some of them for some of the other global sectors, and we need to develop some. But they are on their way, and they would allow us to reduce today in the world about 50% of total carbon emissions with what we already have on hand. The policy is something we still have to work about, and which this conference is all about. The elephant in the room in this particular event is whether the policy is dictated at the IMO or in another place, and that is something that has to be resolved. But there is no question for a need of policy, and so that's another point of agreement. And the third is a financing, and that is where the world needs to come together. We all talk about 100 billion by the year 2020. In the fiscal conditions of today, we're not going to get even close. To be serious about the transformation and the opportunity which this represents in terms of creating jobs and getting beyond the Industrial Revolution, we need a carbon tax You have called it a common levy here that plays evenly amongst the field. We have SDR rights in the IMF that we should be considering, which would be non-inflationary in the amount that we need them to finance the world. And we have leverage. Take the green fund with whatever money it has, bring down the interest on banking loans to the industry to 1% or 0%. You will see all of the transformation, creating all the jobs, market opportunities, and economic growth that this world needs. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you. Diane, next, please.
Good morning. Thank you very much for inviting me, and the International Chamber of Shipping, Norwegian Shipping Association, and the French Shipping Association. Thank you for hosting this important event. During the course of the morning, we've talked about people talking about smart technology and green technology, and I'm here to represent the Smart Green Shipping Association. I represent a team of brilliant, dedicated, creative individuals who are passionate about solving big problems in shipping and finding lucrative solutions to those challenges. We like to think of ourselves as the Silicon Valley of shipping. So we've got naval architects, marine engineers, yacht racing designers, academics, systems designers, all working together, understanding the deep incumbent shipping system to create solutions that work today and work in the future. And the clear and overlooked opportunity that the shipping sector could benefit from is renewable energy. So we heard Sam this morning talking about how the coal industry decided that it wasn't possible to change, and the renewable energy industry came along, and we've seen a transformational shift in the way businesses operate as a consequence of using free fuel. It completely changes operational models and puts certainty and resilience at the heart of business. And we'd like to be able to facilitate that transformational shift in the maritime sector. So we believe that there's a huge opportunity for maritime renewables. We heard the IMO this morning talking about the inability of the sector to harness that energy, and I think we need to open our minds a bit and recognise that the people who do harness that technology and harness the ability to free fuel are going to be the energy tycoons of the future, and I think we want to be part of that. So thinking about renewable energy, it's abundant, it's exclusively available to the maritime sector. So once we start to think about the constraints that are going to be put upon the whole of the economy as a result of climate change, it's really important to be able to decouple ourselves in the shipping sector from traditional bunkering arrangements, not to have to rely on cold ironing, where there's going to be a call on 100 other industry sectors looking to use that low carbon power, and to use the energy that's available at sea. And I'm sure all the seafarers in the room will confirm there is an abundance of wind, wave and solar energy out there, and we should be harnessing it. So what we're looking at in the Smart Green Shipping Alliance is not doing some sort of blue sky thinking, but to use existing proven commercial solutions and combining them in new ways to create good to go solutions. So I won't go into detail of our project because I think it's not particularly relevant to the conversation, but I think what we've been able to do is to combine existing technologies to produce a system that is 50% more fuel efficient than anything else on the market. And we've also developed a very smart analysis system to be able to validate that performance data, which is really important for all the players in the sector to be able to get confidence around. So having had this system solution, we've taken it to cargo owners, we've taken it to shippers, and we've asked them if they'd like to use this type of technology, and they have been very enthusiastic because they have their own domestic carbon reduction commitments in place. And as servants of global trade, we need to be serving that need to decarbonise their supply chain. So on the one hand, we have advanced technology, and on the other hand, we have a very strong demand pull. So now we're asking and inviting ship owners to participate in the alliance to help us deliver the long-term contracts that those shippers are prepared to give us. So I would say that it's time for the shipping industry to recognise the opportunity, to embrace the potential that this global challenge gives us in realising a whole range of technologies, not just the one that I'm representing as the Smart Green Shipping Alliance, but a whole range of technologies and innovations which could rapidly decarbonise the business. And I think what we're looking at here is the potential to unleash a new golden age of shipping, and I would urge the community to take it.
Paul, please.
Thank you very much, and I'd also like to thank the organizers, the Norwegian Shipping Association, for putting this event together. From the perspective of the IEA, I'd like to deliver two fairly simple messages this morning. First, putting this whole debate in something of a larger analytical context. As many of you know, the IEA does analysis and scenarios going out to 2040, 2050 on carbon and on energy trends, so I'd like to put shipping in that larger debate. And secondly, making a few linkages between the discussion in this room and the discussion that's taking place out at Le Bourget. And in particular, in all of this, I'd like to recognize my colleague in the audience, Pier Paolo Cassola, who's our transport analyst who's done a lot of work on shipping. Do you want to stand up, Pier Paolo? Thank you for your help in putting this presentation together. First of all, we see shipping largely as part of a larger challenge of decarbonizing the entire transport sector with a major role for energy efficiency. Looking in terms of the numbers today, shipping consumes about 10% of total energy demand in transport, about a quarter of the energy needed for freight transport. But as all of you know, the volume of freight transported is much higher, 81%, because of the well-known efficiencies. We'd also like to salute what the IMO has done to date. We think it's quite significant. The NOx and SOx regulations, the Energy Efficiency Design Index, the target of 30% improvement by 2025. These are very, very significant. And these are going to require the industry to undertake a number of changes in terms of the way it operates. Some fuel switching will be needed. This switch to middle distillates, the use of onboard scrubbers on the SOx and NOx, the use of additional alternative fuels like LNG. All of this is going to be very important. It will involve major structural change for the industry. Looking ahead at our scenarios, we've done scenario work that goes out to 2040 and to 2050. And in our baseline scenario, which incorporates the already pledged INDCs by member countries, we are expecting that energy use in shipping will increase by 17% to 2030 and by about 36% by 2050. But that will not, and that will require some improvement in energy efficiency by about 30% between now and 2030. But that will not be enough to bend the curve down to 2 degrees. In our 2-degree scenario, the impact on shipping is much greater. And we are expecting that we'll need a 50% improvement in energy intensity. And we see that being achieved by tightened greenhouse gas emissions requirements, fuel quality, and pollution emission regulations. And these will lead to higher shares of diesel fuel, higher shares of LNG, and higher shares of advanced biofuels in the mix. Now let's move beyond and take a look at the broader process that's going on out at the COP meetings. And the IEA has conducted analysis of the global impact of the existing INDCs, and we're expecting that those would result in an increase of temperature to about 2.7 degrees by 2050. So we will not see emissions peaking either before 2030. But we have put forward a bridge scenario in which countries can take immediate actions in 5 major areas that could actually produce an early peaking of emissions by 2020. And I think it's important to note that energy efficiency steps could represent nearly half of the steps that would be needed in order to create that earlier peak in emissions. So the type of work that's underway in the shipping industry, the type of emissions reductions that are underway by the IMO. This is important, but we would need continued parallel action and more intensified action through the IMO. So summing up, there are major challenges ahead, clearly, for the shipping industry. Shipping is and will remain one of the most efficient, we think, freight transport modes. Environmental regulations are expected to have an impact on marine fuel choice and obviously energy consumption patterns in shipping. We think LNG could have a positive impact on greenhouse gas emissions in shipping. But when we look beyond at broader structural changes and the increased share of renewables, increased share of biofuels, this will also really be related to the broader challenge of how we're going to be electrifying and decarbonizing the overall transport sector. And the analysis that the IEA has done shows that it's going to be much easier to decarbonize electricity than it is transport or industry. So again, the steps that are being taken are important. The challenges for the overall transport sector are substantial. Should fuel switching fail to be economically viable because, for instance, of failures of advanced biofuels to become competitive, then closing the gap and creating that 50% efficiency improvement that we saw will require other kinds of solutions and really perhaps more radical changes. And there we've heard other things in the first panel too. For example, a reliance more on local sourcing and reduced shipping activities. But in general, we think the focus on energy efficiency is the right way to go. And we think that more accelerated movement towards higher ambitions of energy efficiency is where the low-hanging fruit exists with respect to the shipping industry. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Hervé, if you'd like to go last, we can keep it brief so we can get to some questions. That'd be great.
Thank you very much to have invited us as ship owner. I would say single actor ship owner, and we can give some testimony of our approach to this CO2 issue. The first thing I would like to highlight is that international shipping is global, is transparent market, and is highly competitive. In this condition, for a single ship owner, there is only 2 drivers for CO2 reduction actions. There is the rules, regulations, and there is the money. You cannot imagine on your side to invest in CO2 reduction actions or devices or anything if you are alone, and then you become uncompetitive, and then you're dead. So the only way to improve the situation is that either it's compulsory by rules, or you can make savings by doing it. So there is rules coming from IMO, basically, which are started on global access since 2-3 years, and that will give improvement in the next 10 years. And also there is a very high increase of the cost of the fuel. But this increase of the cost of fuel has been followed in the 2000s by increase of the freight. And only when there have been a divergence between the increase of cost of fuel and increase of cost of freight in 2008, 2009, then there have been a huge effort to improve efficiency. And in 2-3 years, there have been a dramatic improvement in new building with the so-called eco-ship, because there was numerous possibilities to improve efficiencies. Very simple, known by everybody since 30 years, but not applied because there was no money for that. There was no saving. So all this saving has been done in 2010-11, and now from shipyards you can get ships that are significantly better than what has been done 10 years ago. And for instance, we can get today in some kind of ships efficiency which is already almost at the level of the IMO EEDI Tier 3. We have vessels with today 27% saving better efficiency than the Tier 1 EEDI. Now we have to go to the next phase. And next phase is much more complex. It's technologies breakthrough, or it's known technologies but expensive technologies. And the problem is today the fuel is not expensive. So it's very difficult for ship owners today to invest in a battery-driven vessel, to renewable energy assistance, and to other kind of saving efficiency. So today we need to have rules or more expensive fuel. And after, the future will be, of course, decarbonate of the transportation. So most likely we'll go to hydrogen, we'll go to batteries, to fuel cells, but we need a lot of time for that because today's technology is not there. And also we need that the economics of that is possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll just say goodbye to the Minister, but... Merci, monsieur. So, Hervé, if I can start with you, I'd just ask a question of each panellist in turn and then open up for questions from the floor. I was interested in knowing what shippers demand. Diane was talking about whether they have their own goals to lower emissions. Do you see shippers, the IKEAs, the Toyotas of the world, do they ask you for more environmentally friendly solutions, or are they just interested in cost?
There are very few shippers that are usually industrial people with CO2 footprint concern or obligation that are checking what is the consumption and CO2 footprint of our vessels. Otherwise, people are going to cost.
That's quite striking. And Paul, if I could ask you, I mean, do you think when you listen to this, one of Hervé's points was, that regulations are needed when you look at industries. Is that what is needed to cut fuel consumption? And is that what's needed in transport, which, as you say, is a more difficult sector maybe than electricity?
Well, I think clearly you either need a price signal or you need a regulatory signal. And right now, we're not getting the price signal. We're not getting the price signal in transport, in ground transport either, especially in the United States, where gasoline prices are below $2 a gallon. So I think there are parallels a little between the road transport sector and the ship transport in terms of the types of steps that would be needed. So you need to push one or the other, either from the price side or from the regulatory side.
Mm-hmm. And Diane, to follow on with that, I mean, it's a very visionary message you have, and you urge the industry to do it. But what do you, I mean, what needs to happen for the industry? Does it need a few sort of front-running companies to do it, or you know, visionary governments, or what do you think actually needs to happen?
So what needs to happen is those things have to happen concurrently, and I think what we can experience is a rapid acceleration of technological step change if we had a clear regulatory signal. That this is a challenge that we want to embrace and that we can embrace. I think that would enable our project, which is marginal in today's low fuel situation, to fly, but also a multitude of other technologies which are just not getting the oxygen that they need because of the low oil price. I think, you know, what we've done in the Smart Green Shipping Alliance is selected shippers to talk to. So there are shippers that are measuring their carbon emissions through their supply chain. Unilever is amongst them, Dow Chemical does it. These companies are seeking out low carbon supply chain solutions, and I think that's a trend that the shipping industry ignores at its peril, because I think we have the opportunity by deploying renewable energy, and I emphasize again that there is a cost to harnessing it, but over the lifetime of the vessel, we've talked about these vessels having 20, 30-year lifetimes. Over the lifetime of the vessel, that is a fixed cost. Once you've invested the capex at the front end of the solution, it remains there over the lifetime of the vessel. So I think regulatory change and some support, financial support, to help us get over this hump of acceptance that this technology, renewable energy technology, can make a significant difference to the shipping sector is what's needed.
And finally, Jose Maria, maybe on the similar point, how do we get over the problem of cheap fuel at the moment? I mean, what needs to be done? Is it regulation? Is it the governments that need to act? Is it?
The more I learn about the fuel situation, the more indicators I get that we may be in for a longer period of time at levels of fuels that we are seeing today than a bounce back to the prices of where they were before they came down. And that, of course, poses a huge additional challenge in moving from fossil-based fuels, which are 70% of carbon emissions, to clean energy where we want to be. I think, as you said, it's going to take a bit of everything coming together. I'm encouraged by the technologies. I see a lot of technologies out there in different fields, and I see earlier adoption and much more interest in adoption. I hope that with what will come out of Paris, we will have a much better roadway in terms of the policy framework, and where I believe we're still lagging behind is in the financing. How do we finance the transition for the world economy to move from a fossil fuel-based economy to a renewable-based economy? Governments don't have the wherewithal to do it. They are putting a lot of the burden of financing on the private sector and on business and saying, you guys go do it. There are not the credit facilities lined up in the world of today for this type of a transition. And unless we really get serious about how we finance the complete overhaul, the complete reconversion, we're not going to see the amount of financing that the world requires. I believe that one of the answers to that is in leverage. So to the point I made earlier, if we take the funds that governments are putting into the Green Development Fund and the other things, and we use those as leverage for financing or to bring interests down, I think we'll be moving faster forward on the financing side.
Thank you. We have about 5 minutes for questions. I'm not going to open it to the floor because I've already got two, which I fear is probably the limit. But The gentleman at the back who I told to wait for his turn, do we have a microphone for him? Or I take that. If you could keep your question short, please. Thank you.
Thank you. Colin Lachlan, BC Shipping News in Canada. I actually got a partial answer from Ed Hughes at the break, but let me just return to it as sort of a thematic question, and there's a lot of components to it. Ed thought that there was some price signal coming out on carbon pricing from the North American ECA. Some of the ports there, differentials in prices, but it's tied to what is the state of the art in current developments on low sulfur fuels. Where are we at with regard to a shipping industry carbon price forecast realistically? A lot hangs on, when's it going to come about? And question partly is, putting a price on carbon may open up opportunities for marketplace mechanisms. Will it also stimulate or bring about trading schemes which aren't necessarily endorsed by organizations such as the ICS?
Thank you. The good journalistic trick of 3 questions in one. But who would like to go first? Hervé, do you, or Diane? You can take your pick of question.
Low sulfur fuel, I think, is a bit of a distraction, really. And I say that because I kind of fail to grasp all of the technical and intricate details of this conversation that goes on. And I think it's a real risk that we worry so much about percentages, and I have huge debates with colleagues in the Smart Green Shipping Alliance about this, but we worry so much about this percentage over here and that percentage over there that we're missing the goal. There's an open goal in front of us. Let's do something which is going to improve the operational, commercial and environmental footprint of the fleet, will attract great people to the industry and generate good media coverage. And so we then don't get distracted by, I know it's important, and I know there are much better people qualified than much better qualified than me to answer these questions. So I think we should be talking about what's really important is how do we reduce carbon emissions, how do we do it drastically, quickly, and I think we need to embrace that challenge. So.
And
Hervé,
Hervé,
wasn't an
maybe
answer to your question, I'm sorry.
Well, maybe if I can follow up that, Hervé, if you're looking at the kind of technologies that will most work and most lower emissions, what is there and what's holding you back from deploying them in ships?
Well, I cannot say there is one technology. Yeah. The saving is an addition of a lot of things. You can play on the airlines, you can play on the ship weight, you can play on the operation of the ships, you can play on the design point. For instance, in the past, the design point of the ship was defined by the contractual definition, and that basically no relationship with the future operation of the ship. So if you can adjust the thing in order that the ship is designed for the operation and not for another thing in the operation field, then we have a good saving. So I don't think there is one direction. There is a lot of things to do. The main engines are also a very big thing. And the addition of all these small things, you can save 2%, 3%, 5%, and then you get 20, 25%. Further, then it's complex. Then you need to have new technologies. You need to go to hybrid. You need to go to air bubble to reduce the friction. You have to go to a shark skin type coating. You have to go to things that are real improvement. But that is very expensive. That is technology today not known very well, and we need to work on that. But that is the next step. Today, we can achieve 20, 25, 30% with the means we have today.
And there was one last question from the lady there. It was actually, I'm afraid, sorry. Maybe you, I think we only have time for this one question.
My name is Pia Berglund, and I'm from the Swedish Shipowner Association, and I have a few of these green-hearted shipowners in my association. It's not very easy, and I think you actually, Diane, is touching up on something very important. Technically, we can put a group of ship builders in the room, and they will build us a really nice ship. No one can afford to run that ship. So I think you are talking about other measures than technicals. I don't know if that's addressed in your initiative, but I would give you one example, contractual ones. We have one of our ship owners trade with the cars, and the cargo owner wanted to have a certain speed, meaning that you have to build a very fast ship. And just by acknowledging in discussions that maybe if you reduce the speed, the highest speed that was used 2% of the time, the whole contractual time, we can actually build a ship that is 25% more energy efficiency in itself. But it came as a technology solution, but it was actually a contractual solution, and also the increase of the Panama Canal, which is now 20-25%, you can build the ships more energy efficient. There's so many other factors in the logistics chain. And is there someone of you have any ideas? Because there's so many pointing at us, and we are so reliant on other people to do the jobs, to build good infrastructure, build contractual relationships, and there's so much we can do.
Yes, Diane, if you go first.
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely. This is a systems change. We're looking at transformational shift in a whole system. So we have to look across the entire ecosystem. And that's why the Alliance comprises people in every single sector of the shipping operations. So we've been working with shipbuilders, we've been working with ports, we've been working with marine engineers, naval architects, academics, with legal profession, with finance, to try and understand how we can move all of the pieces of the jigsaw at the same time. And it's a huge challenge, but it's also, I don't know how much longer we've got, but I just wanted to make a kind of...
sadly, not very long.
Not very long. Okay, so
sorry.
I just want to make a plea to everybody to recognise that we can all do something about this, whatever field we're in and whatever sector that we're in. And actually, when you do it, when you start to do it, it's really, really good fun. I mean, bringing people together and creating new solutions is almost as much fun as it gets. I mean, I'm sure there's some other stuff that's quite good fun. But anyway, I think I have a background in Formula One motor racing and offshore yacht racing. And if somebody says to those people, those kind of people, you've got to get to the grid by 2 o'clock on Sunday afternoon, you get there. And that's the sort of energy and enthusiasm and possibility that we can unleash by setting that goal. And so I'd love to work with you on that whole kind of piece of how do we do the systems change.
And if I can just ask Mr. Figueres, on that point on the supply chain, I mean, as Diane mentions, there's lots of parts of it, building, operating, owning, financing. How do you make sure that the entire supply chain is promoting green shipping?
I guess by getting into the engine room and doing all of the above at the same time. There's a tremendous amount that can be brought to market in terms of the credibility of the technologies that are out there. Some of them have been proven, some of them have not been proven, and the question marks that remain with those that especially have not been proven, of course, are a major sticking point for implementation. So there's also room for like third-party auditing of technologies and issuing of reports on these technologies to see if they are a song and a dance or if they are really delivering the goods.
Well, thank you very much, and thank you to all four of our panelists. Excellent discussion. Just before we go for lunch, we've got a final 10-minute closing remarks, a little summing up of everything. So if I could ask Peter, Sturla and Eric to come up here. And well, Peter, as you're closest, why don't you start? Maybe you can just give some sort of summarising remarks, takeaways from today's event.
Thanks, Richard. Well, it's my passionate wish that all of you in this room will take away a slightly revised picture of the industry. I hope that you will take away an image of an industry which is modern, efficient, and at the same time indispensable to world trade, an industry which is compliant with the global aspirations at COP21, has acknowledged its responsibility and will deliver on that responsibility in terms of its efficiency. An industry which is leading innovation towards decarbonisation, but as you've just heard, perhaps is limited by a lack of investment and by the current trading conditions. An industry which is dealing with the problem of maritime transport across increasingly inhospitable oceans. Don't talk to the shipping industry of the impact of climate change. We are living it every day at sea. But we're doing that while still enhancing the safety of its operation 24/7, 365 days a year. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sturla, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you very much. I would like to thank all the participants here, and I would in particular like to thank those of you who are not part of the shipping community, because I think that your challenges, your perspectives are extremely important to us. I just want to say that we have no doubts that what we are facing is a global, generational and existential challenge where everyone have to contribute. And we are prepared to do that. And I think that on the path towards the low carbon society, there is no way back. There is no place to hide. And for this industry, we need to do what is necessary to make our contributions, be they technologically, and there is a large drive in this industry to improve. It's like the artists of this Centre of Modern Art, that they constantly have to reinvent themselves to remain competitive. I think also that this industry, there are sort of 3 areas in which we can contribute. One is by improving the energy efficiency of the kinds of operations that we already do. The second is by transporting more of the goods which is now carried by trucks. And thirdly, in the offshore industry, we have the technology, we have the operational concepts which are ready to an increasing degree for renewable energy production from offshore installations. And we are ready to work also committedly and continuously with regulatory measures. We have stated that we would support a levy to further incentivize carbon reduction from this industry, provided that it's introduced in a global uniform way. So I just want to say that this is a commitment that we take very seriously, and I think that the discussion today has been very encouraging, and I want to end on the positive note that I'm firmly convinced that this industry is part of the solution. We are doing a lot of things already, but I think that we can contribute also more extensively in the future. Thank you so much.
Wow. So I stand up. The shipping industry has quite an impressive record with respect to reducing its CO2 emissions. We all heard about this morning. But the key message for us is that we don't want to stay like this. We don't want to stay in the middle of the path. We want to carry on our efforts. We want to be proactive and responsible players. And we know that there are strong expectations from policymakers, from the civil society for us to do more. And I will say that the shipping industry, as represented by NSA, ICS, and Armateurs de France, as a whole, we are committed to this challenge. We are committed to reducing our CO2 emissions and to do more. So we don't want to be left behind. So Sturla told us that we have a lot of discussions around, especially within ICS. I will say that we are not afraid of the solutions. We are not afraid to consider market-based measures or a levy. We are not afraid to speak about new types of technologies, new types of propulsion. We are ready to discuss with all of you, but with also the public authorities. And we really want the industry to be the force of proposition, to be the ones around the table that make things possible. So that's the main point today, and I thank you everybody to be here in Paris with us. And so enjoy the lunch and enjoy the time in Paris and enjoy COP21.
Yeah, it just remains to say thank you to all our panelists. Merci beaucoup, tusen tak, and enjoy lunch. Thank you.
And thank you to Richard for excellently moderating us through this seminar. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks very much. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. It's all right. No, I think it was much easier.